Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sandra Arevalo, once again, doing community chats from Montefiore Nyack Hospital. I'm the Director of Community Health and Wellness, and happy to be here today to be talking about CatchU, which is a very catchy name, to talk about a program that is, whose goal is to prevent falls, especially in the elderly. And I don't know how many people knew this, but apparently, falls are not only causing a lot of pain and injuries, but they are also the number one death cause among elderly. So definitely a topic to talk about if we are older ourselves, or if we have elderly people to take care from, grandparents, parents, this is very useful information for all of us. So who is better than talking about this than Dr. Jeanette Mahoney, who we just happened to find online, believe it or not. We were very intrigued and admiring some videos that you actually had in YouTube. I think that's how we found you. And believe it or not, I couldn't believe my eyes when she answered my emails and she kindly offered to share her program with us, which is, very creative. So thank you so much for being here, Dr. Mahoney. And just to tell you a little bit about her, she's a professor in the Department of Neurology. She's also the chief of the Division and Cognitive and Sensory Motor Aging Program. Did I say it right? And of course, that sounds like over our brains. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what is it that you do, Dr. Mahoney, so that we can better understand, because all of these are like very big words, and I don't want to fall short on all your credentials and all your experience. So welcome.
No worries. Thank you so much for having me, Sandra. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you guys today. I did prepare some slides, but if this is more informal where we're to chat, I'm happy to do either. That's up to you. But basically, I'm a neuroscientist. It's funny, I was born on Long Island. I grew up in Rockland and I still reside in Rockland, but I wound up coming to college at Stony Brook. And then I went on to get my PhD in the Bronx. So I stayed in the Bronx at Albert Einstein College of Medicine, which is affiliated with Montefiore, for the past 16 years, where I actually developed the app CatchU based on all of the work that I had been doing over the past 15 years, looking at how the brain integrates information across both visual and somatosensory sensory systems. We did a lot of work showing that older adults who had difficulty responding to both visual and somatosensory, which is things we touch, right? Like vibrations, like our cell phones, that had difficulty responding to both when they came at the same time were those who went on to have problems with gait, problems with balance, and were actually having falls, more and more falls, as we studied them longitudinally. So I spent a lot of time writing a lot of papers, securing a few grants, and what we found was that this simple little reaction time test, which I can show you all, went on to be a significant predictor of falls. And our latest work is showing that it's also predicting preclinical Alzheimer's disease. So it's really significant. It's the first of its kind sort of quantitative test that you could bring to a patient and say, take this 10-minute test. It's like playing a phone on a game. And the doctor can actually get a report. It's a window to how well your brain is functioning. The doctor gets a report, and rather than just asking you, do you have a history of falls or have you fallen in the past, they can see how well you're actually performing. And then we can curate a whole bunch of different recommendations that are really not recommendations that I came up with. They're adapted from the CDC STEADY program, which has reviewed hundreds of papers and studies. And what the doctor can then do is sort of cherry pick the recommendations that they feel the patient would have the best results with. And then we can test them again to see if they have improvements, or if, God forbid, they've worsened, to sort of tweak the recommendations so that we can go on to, catch people before they have that fall.
Wow, that sounds amazing. So yes, we welcome all the slides that you have. So if you want to start by slides, and I'm just going to ask our attendees if you have any questions, please use the Q&A at the bottom of your screen or the chat box and just send us all your questions and comments. We would like to make this as interactive as possible. And Dr. Mahoney, I'll be reading those questions or comments to you as we move along.
Awesome. And it doesn't look like we're that many, so honestly, feel free to interrupt me. This can be as informal, as informative as you guys want. I have a lot of material to cover, but I would really like to make sure that I address questions or concerns that people are most interested in. I'll start with like a general introduction so you guys can sort of understand the science, and I'll try to keep that low level just so you can see where we've come from in the lab and the importance of basically getting it to the people, which is through this app. So I have some disclosures. They're here for you guys to see. I've sort of already introduced myself, but here we go. CatchU. So this is the product. This is I'm on this noble mission to raise awareness of falls and prevent falls and improve the well-being of older adults and all people. I sort of already told you a little bit about me, and you gave me a great introduction, so I won't spend time here, but I will say that my current R01, which is an NIH-funded longitudinal study, is still operating, still running at Albert Einstein College of Medicine with my collaborators at Montefiore. And we should be done testing that in the next couple of years. The objectives of this talk was to introduce this concept of sensory integration. I wanted to demonstrate how important it is in aging and describe its important links to various motor and cognitive outcomes. And then obviously the need to discuss how we can catch people before they fall. So what is multisensory integration? It's really just from an evolutionary perspective, the way in which we respond to all the sensory stimuli that, are popping up in our everyday world. Our senses are efficiently designed to basically take in all the information and process it in a concerted manner, meaning it all comes in and it's like a symphony, right? It's not like I hear the violin or I see the guitar or there's somebody sing. It all comes in and it's all being processed simultaneously. And our ability, which is not, basically, well, it is involuntary. It's not voluntary. We don't focus on integrating this information. Basically, it comes in and our ability of the brains to successfully integrate that information allows us to respond to our environment faster and, to more accurate objects and events. That's very loud. So I'm sure everybody can relate, but if you imagine walking down the streets of Manhattan at night, there's so much going on, right? There's this large bombardment of sounds and smells and lights and, people moving, and it's a very fast world. But, we would like to survive, so we have to navigate through this environment. So we take in the stimuli that are most important to us, right? Obviously, anything threatening, we're going to change our actions or avoid. But we somehow are able to navigate that. But the fact is that some people do it better than others.
Mhm.
So if you could all, I mean, I don't know if we want to open it to the public, but everybody, I was trying to ask everybody to think of a couple of things that we deal with every day that are multisensory and typically multisensory on purpose. So I don't know if anybody wants to throw anything in the chat that they think might be an example of some sort of an object or thing that we use in our everyday lives that is multisensory in nature.
And someone is saying phones, and as a dietitian, I have to say food.
For sure. And phones is what I had. Phones is like the number one thing that we're constantly dealing with, right? Our phone lights up, it vibrates, it makes sounds, like we pick what kind of stimulation we want. Do we want, I've seen people that have their phone ring and have their like flash of the camera light up. I think for me it's way too much sensory overload. For me, my phone's usually off on silent with a very low vibration. That's how I know when someone's trying to get me. But your phone can ring, it can vibrate, it can light up, it can do any combination of those things. And the reason is because the more stimulation you get, the greater the likelihood that you will answer the phone faster.
Mhm.
What this is about. Some other ones I can think of usually say it's like a backup camera, right? In your car, you can see, and they have that beep, 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 beep as you get closer. That's intentional, right? And if you think about crosswalks, it used to be just the light, go, stop, right, or the hand. But now they have the sounds, and some of them even have those sort of bumpy concrete blocks. That's for somatosensation on your feet. So all of those things are put there on purpose to avoid you getting hit by a car, to make it safe for you to cross the road. So this is a real thing that exists in real life, and they're sort of built strategically so that we can respond to these things in a fast and efficient way. So the thing about a multisensory event is our brain is actually able to trump on the fact that it's getting two bits of information about the same event rather than just one. So if you could imagine the phone just lighting up and you answering it, or the phone just vibrating and you answer it, the probability of you answering that phone if it lights up and vibrates at the same time is much quicker than you responding to either of the two unisensory constituents, meaning just the light or just the vibration. Because there's this redundancy in sensory information, it gives rise to this phenomenon that allows these redundant signals to collect in the brain in a synergistic manner so that we can respond quicker.
Dr. Mahoney, I have a question. Is there a limit to this sensory response? Like, for example, I see some movies now that say, like some lights can create some effects on people, so be careful.
Mhm.
Or like if you go to a club, like all the lights and the music, and I personally can't stand it.
Yes, yes, I know
So
what you're talking about.
So how much is enough, or is there a point where, it's too much, or I guess it depends on each person?
Each person, I mean, they talk about like divergent minds and neurodivergence now because everybody has their own sort of threshold. To me, that strobing light in the club is definitely super annoying. For somebody else, it could trigger, it could trigger some sort of trauma, some sort of, seizure. It could trigger lots of different things, but not for everybody. Some people might actually enjoy it, right? So the whole reason why we set up these tests is to look at these differences because everybody has different thresholds. For me, like I can tell you at night, if I'm going to bed, my room needs to be dark, there needs to be quiet, and there needs to be some sort of a fan on. And like, I don't want to, have socks because of my own sensory quirkiness. I'm sure people have their own things, but everybody has different thresholds. And this test is sort of designed to be able to hone into that to see where they're at and whether or not they're integrating this information. So you might ask, why would we actually care? Why would we study this in aging? And I think Sandra, you had a great intro, but we're at this sort of point in our lives where so many people are falling. One in three older adults will go on to have a fall, and this leads to over 3 million emergency room visits every year, which could be in turn an injurious fall or could actually lead to, as you said, a person's demise. Poor balance is really a major predictor of falls. And we have found in the literature that age-related unisensory decline, so hearing impairment, visual impairment, neuropathy, all of these things have been individually linked to worse motor outcomes. Now, the thing about balance is balance requires this efficiency between our musculoskeletal and sensory systems, especially visual and somatosensory, and vestibular, which I'll argue is a sixth sense, but it hasn't made it yet. But all of those have to combine and work together in order to control our everyday movements. This is known to be compromised in aging. So what we've found in the literature and through our own work is that multisensory integration could actually be a compensatory process, which we can use to overcome some of these physiological declines in unisensory processing. So through my work and my research and my grant, we're really trying to come to the conclusion of whether or not there's this one possible underlying neural function, or I'm sorry, excuse me, neural mechanism that could be responsible for concurrent declines in sensory, cognition, and motor functioning. So just to sort of walk you through what would happen in the lab, this is where this research started 15 years ago. If you were a participant, let's say Sandra, you'd be sitting at a desk, you'd have your foot over this response pad, right? Your foot would be, it would like, it'd be like touching a gas pedal. You know, you push down on it when you want to respond. We would have white noise on headphones. This would be so that you don't hear anything going on and you don't hear any of like the motors of the stimuli coming on. You'd be sitting there with your fingers behind these two blocks and your eyes would be fixated on a stationary bullseye. And what would happen is as your hands are on these blocks, your thumb would be under this blue, you can see it from a side view here, just small LED light that sometimes goes on, sometimes not. And your finger on the back would be on this little pager vibrator, which is similar to what's in our iPhones. And all you would be tasked with doing is pressing that foot pedal in response to anything that was visual. So basically, two blue lights that flashed very quick. Anything that was somatosensory, so two vibrations. It's always one on each hand. It's never just one hand or the other. It's always a bilateral presentation. So you'd get either the two lights and you would respond, you'd get the two vibrations and you'd respond, and in some cases, both would happen at the same time. And what we would do is we would look at your reaction time profiles to what happens when I just present the somatosensory events, what happens when I just present the lights, and what happens when I present them together. And this is sort of an idea of what would happen. It's usually like a randomized order. You could get a light, you can get a vibration, then you can get a multisensory event. They're all mixed in together. They're separated by some intertrial intervals just to avoid anticipatory effects. And we go on and do like 3 blocks of 2.5 minutes, where in that 2.5 minutes, you're presented with 45 stimuli. So the whole test takes like less than 10 minutes. Just to give you an idea, like a light, a vibration, alone, and then together. So what we found in our very first paper, and I'm not going to bore you guys with the details or the algorithm or how we get here, but basically, in a nutshell, takes all of those reaction times alone. It figures out a cumulative probability distribution. So what's the probability of your response occurring between 100 milliseconds and 1,000 milliseconds, let's say. And we do that for every person, right? And so we get a waveform for each of the three stimuli. So the visual alone, the soma alone, and the multisensory. The thing about the experiment is all three conditions rely on the same response pad. All three conditions use the same stimuli to an extent. And what we're always looking for is the difference in reaction time between when you were presented the two together minus whatever happened alone. So we're looking at the phenomenon of integration. And you might say, well, what does that mean, Jeanette? How do you know if somebody's integrating? So this is an average difference waveform of of 289 people's performance across this 10-minute test. And what you can see here is any positive deflection on this curve is indicative of multisensory integration. And we expect that to occur at the earlier end of the distribution. Why? Because at some point, if you were to think of like 3 bell curves of reaction times, at some point, all of those curves are going to overlap. So your somatosensory reaction time might be the fastest between 400 and 800, and the range for the visual might be between 450 and 850, but the multisensory might actually be between 330 and 550. So there's 3 curves, but what we're looking for is all of the stuff that happens on the fastest end of the curve. So what I can say here is in almost 300 people, there was this nice positive inflection of multisensory integration that occurred over the fastest 10% of reaction times. And what we did is in this first study is we really wanted to understand, because back in the day when I was a postdoc and processing all of these patients one at a time by hand in Excel, I was noticing every curve and everyone looked a little bit different. And I couldn't understand, why do some people have these huge positive curves and why do some people have curves that never come over the x-axis? And what I found was that if we looked at this based on how well they integrated, meaning how many points they had in that positive range over the fastest 10%, that dashed line is everybody together. But you can see here that there are people on the order of 90 out of 289, this dark black line have this huge multisensory phenomenon going on. And on the contrary, the people in the dark gray, there are 44 of them, have this large deficient multisensory integration. These people here never have any positive points over the zero axis, suggesting that they never integrate. So my question started emerging and saying, okay, what's going on in their brains? Why are they not integrating such a simple reaction time task? There's no cognitive, there's no heavy cognitive piece to this, right? It's basically a go test. If you get stimulated, respond as fast as possible. You don't have to think, right? You don't have to say, well, did it come up in red or did it come up in blue or are there even numbers or odd numbers? It's all right there for you. Respond as soon as possible.
Dr. Mahoney, just to make sure, we are understanding correctly. So I'm understanding that if you present some sort of a stimuli to people in the beginning, they're supposed to react more. And then as you send the same stimuli, then it starts getting less and less.
Not really.
Okay.
You're just repeating that sensory stimulation.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, if I asked you to respond as fast as possible to 10 lights, right, you would have some range of responses. You maybe one time you sort of like dozed off and it took you a little longer, right? But maybe one time you were really focused and you got it really quick. So you would get like 10 reaction times. Maybe it would be like 300 milliseconds, 345, 369, 402, 250. Like you'd have a whole bunch of those reaction times and there'd be some variability. You're not a robot. You can't,
Yeah.
respond at exactly the same time. So it is that variability of the responses within each of those conditions that we're looking at. We haven't really looked at how reaction times change over the course of the experiment. The whole point is to just get enough trials and enough sort of variability where we can assess and that's why they're all intermixed, right? We can assess whether or not on the average were your reaction times to the multisensory faster than those to either of the two uni.
Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. And again, don't be shy, guys. If you have questions, please ask them. So using that sort of magnitude under the curve, that area under the curve, that's our continuous measure of, excuse me, how well somebody integrates. And what we found in our very first paper was that older adults who actually could not integrate, those who had completely, absolutely zero multisensory integration, were the ones who were able to stand on one foot for the shortest amount of time. So as your multisensory integration became higher, meaning better, so did your ability to stand on one leg. And this is the unipedal stance test. And that relationship was still significant. You can see it here before we started controlling for any covariates that might statistically change our models. Even after you controlled for all of these things that could influence how well somebody responds, including their overall reaction time. That's the average of your reaction time across all the stimuli, how old they are, whether they're a male or a woman, whether they're white or of a different ethnic background, whether they have visual impairments or neuropathy, and GHS scores, whether they have significant medical comorbidities. The point is, after you control for all of those things, this magnitude of multisensory integration was still significantly linked to how well one could balance on one foot. And in that same study, we had access to people that we were calling every 2 months to see if they had a fall. And we found over the course of, I think it was a mean of almost 2.5 years, that people who integrated well were at a 76% less likely chance of having an incident fall over the next 2.5 years. So all of this sort of happened in the lab, and I could go on about the other sorts of things we were interested in studying. We wanted to know, we have this ability to study gait in the lab. So we look at lots of different quantitative metrics when we ask you to sort of walk on this mat. And what we found in terms of walking ability is that your gait speed, which is a main index of actually not just motor function, but cognition, was also significantly linked to how well you integrated on this simple reaction time test.
What
These
was the age range?
76 to, I think our oldest person was nine. No, I'm sorry. 76 was the mean. Age range was 65 to, I think our oldest person was 98. And this is in 333 people. So we won't get into the brain too much, but basically that ability to integrate well on this simple reaction time test is linked to how well or how fast you can walk. And we believe it's because the the performance measures that we're tapping into require areas of the brain that are responsible for sensation and motor and cognitive function. So these are just the statistics, and this is the other paper in GATE. So we came to the conclusion that I think there is some really important neural mechanism that's responsible for this combined or concurrent decline in sensory, cognitive, and motor functioning. And so my question is, now that we knew that there was a relationship between multisensory integration and how well we walk, how well we can stand on one leg as a proxy of balance, I wanted to better understand, well, is that relationship mediated by how well somebody's or how intact somebody's cognition is? And what we found was that people who had mild cognitive impairment and dementia, you can see their race model waves here, they're significantly lower than people who in light blue have normal cognition. So those people who have normal cognition, and this is on as diagnosed through a comprehensive neuropsychological battery and case conferencing with a multidisciplinary group of neurologists, neuropsychologists, and students and whatnot. Those people who didn't have cognitive issues were much better at integrating and therefore had better balance and better gait compared to the people who had MCI and dementia, where they were sort of having issues with cognition, which led to issues in sensation and issues with motor performance. So, yes, we believe there's some point in the brain. We're currently studying this at Einstein. We're putting people in the magnet, so they're getting MRIs while they take this reaction time test and respond. And what we're hoping to see is there some area of the brain, which we think is the prefrontal cortex, that lights up when you're able to respond to when you're stimulated by two sensory bits of information over one, and does that amount of activation differ in people who have great integration versus those who do not? So I'll switch gears, which is probably why most of you came here. That was the scientific basis of how we got to the iPhone. How do we get to bring this to the people? So every researcher's dream is to be able to take their research out of the lab and bring it to the clinic so that it's translational, right? So one time, a Montefiore geriatrician came up to me after presenting these results in lab and was like, I need this on my phone. I need to be able to test people in my clinic and know whether or not they integrate. And I looked at her and I'm like, I think we can do that. We could probably develop an app. You know, it was at the time like there's an app for that. So we went on this mission to figure out could we indeed get this on a phone where we could bring it to the people and assess right there within minutes whether or not they would go on to have a fall. I put this up here because it really is the truth. Like, I dedicate this whole thing to my grandma who had a fall and we wound up losing her. And after seeing all of this, all of the important results that I was finding in the lab, I felt like I would be remiss not to get it to the people who need it most. So that's my plug for my grandma. We talked about this a lot. Older adults we already know they have a lot of falls. It's becoming more and more of a problem. To date, we spend about $50 billion a year on falls, and that number is about to double. 101 billion. And the question is why? Why are so many people falling? Why are we not picking it up? So when we did some research about this, we realized that what? We realize that there are a lack of objective and quantitative performance-based measurements in the lab. I'm not sure if we have any physicians on the call, but for the most part, my understanding is during an annual wellness visit, older adults are asked, do you have a history of falling or do you have a fear of falling? And they can say yes, no, and that answers the question, but it doesn't tackle the problem. If they say, yes, I have a fear of falling, yes, I fell last year, there has to be some deliverable. So we don't really measure quantitatively whether or not somebody is at risk for falls yet. And we rely heavily on asking the patients for their subjective response. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that the existing sort of performance-based measures that are out there are either expensive or too time consuming or require the doctor to be present with the staff. Like, it's impossible to get it to a clinic. But we know that counseling can really reduce the occurrence of a fall, but again, it's not systematically integrated. So I sort of have walked through the scientific premise and the research that led to the development of this app. And what I wanted to just show you, and I'm not sure, does this build? No. So what I wanted to show you is that person sitting at a lab at the chair when I said it was Sandra with the headphones and the foot pedal. We took that exact same experiment of this whole idea of presenting visual and somatosensory stimuli, and we put it on a phone, right? And all we did was create an app where we asked people to cradle their phone with their fingers on the back, the bottom like quarter of the phone, right at the bottom, you would have your thumb hovering over and you'd be pushing that because it's a touch screen. As soon as you felt and saw any stimuli, you'd keep your eyes fixated on this cross, the same as in the lab. And then these asterisks would pop up and they come up really quick. They're only presented for like a tenth of a second. So as soon as they come up, you're holding your phone, you got to respond. As soon as the phone vibrates, you got to respond. When it happens together, again, you just respond. So you respond to everything. The test takes 7.5 minutes. It's three 2.5 minute blocks. And we're getting all of that same information that I just presented to you from the lab. But the difference here is like we're taking that information and bringing it to the next level. What we're doing is after you take this test, we're giving the doctor a report. And this report lets the doctor know how fast you're responding to these various sensory stimuli. So we talked about those reaction times. This is somebody, it's fake data. This is somebody's reaction time to visual alone. You see it's kind of long. They're up at about 650 milliseconds. They respond a little bit faster to the soma. Maybe they're right at 600 milliseconds. The error bars are standard error of the mean values. And what you can see here is there's no difference. When this person gets the somatosensory, either alone or combined, that's when they're responding the fastest. There's no benefit. We would like to see this gray bar down about here, this nice sort of facilitation when I give you both at the same time. This person doesn't have that over here in their reaction times, and they do not show it over here in that cumulative probability model. This thing is so negative that it's scary. And so on this particular case, my report would say that this person is at moderate risk of having a fall within the next 6 months. But
Mm.
here's the difference. Here are the actionable items for the doctor to take consideration and to prescribe something that they think can help. Did you have a question, Sandra?
No, not yet, just reading. Mhm.
Okay, so I mean, this is not me. This is from the CDC. Like these are curated, tailored interventions that might help this particular person. Would it be helpful if they started doing Tai Chi, some sort of muscle training, core strength training, balance training to make sure that they don't have a fall? Would this person benefit from receiving physical or occupational therapy? Am I worried that this person, I am, would go on to have a fall in their house where most of the falls occur? Yes. I think home health safety services should go. We should assess, are you in a house that has uneven surfaces? Do you have grip bars in your shower? Do you have the right sort of footwear and the right sort of sheets on your bed? Because some people like to wear silky pajamas, and if they have silky pajamas and silky sheets, one of our colleagues at Sunrise, I think it was Sunrise, or one of these independent living facilities, where there was an increase of falls because of slippery clothing on slippery sheets. They had to go spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to change their bedding to eliminate falls. But the point is, there are things we can do to take control of whether or not, somebody could have a fall. This specific test provides a window to the brain, so we can tell how well somebody is doing. We can offer clinical recommendations that we know are helpful. And it also serves as a sort of cheat sheet for the doctor who's so busy and seeing so many patients and really only has like, 10 or 15 minutes face-to-face time with you. They can see your performance and they can also sort of get a quick checklist of things that the patient endorsed on the app. There's like a medical history section, and I can say, yes, I have a history of chronic heart failure, and I've had a fall, and I have visual problems, I have hearing problems. It just provides that cheat sheet of all the information there for the doctor, and it also lets them know, like, really, falls counseling needs to be given to this patient immediately. There should be some sort of individualized care plan that we can provide the patient to perhaps limit their chances of going on to have an injurious fall. So I can go, or if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer, or if people want to hear other directions. Um,
Here is a question. Do you see improvement on repeat testing?
this is what we're studying. So we actually have um, a study at Einstein where we're giving the tests every year. And we're also running a clinical trial in partnership with Burke Rehab Hospital. And what we want to know is first, we want to know how well people do on the test, right? And then we want to know of the people who don't do well on the test, if a doctor gives them a set of recommendations and we test them again in 6 months, do those recommendations work? So some people will get better, but some people won't. And those who don't, I would like to know, is it because they didn't follow through with the recommendations, or is it because those recommendations didn't work? So if we give this test and we talk more to the patient about the results, and we notice that, you know what, they are doing Tai Chi or they are going to physical therapy, that's not working. Another test in 6 months allows us to sort of revisit this, retweak it, figure out if other therapies are useful, because I don't think it's going to be a one size fits all model. Everybody's different. Everyone's going to require different things. And the whole point of the research that I'm doing at Einstein is to figure out where in the brain this is occurring so that we can build interventions. For me, I'm not sure if the best intervention is going to be some sort of sensory exposure, if it's going to be playing cognitive, if it's going to be exercise or some sort of combination of that. So in the future studies that I run, after we figure out exactly where in the brain this sort of lack of integration is occurring, that knowledge will allow us to develop future grants that allow us to provide the best interventions. So we are seeing changes, but what I'll also say is that we are finding that there are some people who think they're fit as a fiddle. One person was still, a practicing physician, and they bombed the test, and we were like, how is that? This person looks so physically fit, or this person is actively engaged in work, still delivering babies, whatever it is. It's that this test is tapping into something that we can't see. You can't see it just by looking at a person. You can't get it just by talking to a person. You have to actually get the quantitative data. And that person, after they realized that they had a fall and saw their report and listened to their doctor, then admitted, you know what, I do have a balance problem. I realize that I now sit on the bed every morning to put my pants on to avoid having a fall. But had they not have had the test, they would have gone on thinking that they're fine. So that's really sort of the impetus for me wanting to get this out there, is because we just don't know. And until we test people and figure out, get all of the information, all of the data together, once we have that, then we can be more informed and make better individualized care plans to help sort of reduce the chances of having a fall.
Dr. Mahoney, I'm thinking, obviously people who are visually impaired or have, hearing difficulties, they're always at higher risk for falls because of that. So when they do this test, is there something that let us know about that? Like, is there a threshold or something that is specific for people with certain impairments?
Not yet, but one of my plans is to have versions of this test. So we usually study the visual somatosensory system because they're very much involved in walking and
Right.
mobility, right? But that doesn't mean that a blind person can't navigate, or that a person with severe diabetic neuropathy can't feel the ground beneath them, right? But in the case that they have some sort of sensory impairment, I envision having versions of this test that allow us to use different sensory modalities. So if you can't feel anything, well, let's replace the somatosensory stimulus with an auditory one. And then we can have an auditory visual multisensory. Or if the person is blind, then you can do auditory and soma, and they can still respond if you maybe adapt to a different response pad, something that they can hold and press. So there are versions of it that I would like to roll out after we solidify this sort of first one, where I think that we could accommodate people with various issues.
And here is a comment, very exciting work. And I
Thank
have to say, I agree. This is very interesting.
Thank you so much. It definitely means the world to me. Um, I have a few more slides and then we can open it up to a discussion. Just, want to give tribute to my large and growing team that's out there. Myself and my VP of marketing, Lori Lonzak. We have some sales reps out there. We have scientific advisors. Claudine is actually still at Montefiore and Joe's here at Stony Brook and legal and accounting. And in terms of trying to assess falls and get it out there. Our initial targets are really to get into elder care communities, to really talk to geriatricians and other providing doctors to understand the importance of getting this test out. I can't bear the thought of spending, it's not even the money, right? Spending 101 billion a year. It's more of people they're losing their life. They're afraid to get out of their house because they're scared that they might fall. Like people need to get their lives back. They need to be able to feel that they can navigate in their world and if they can't, like, we need to be able to give them tools to empower them to get out there and do what they want to do without having to spend all of their time worrying about having a fall. So we want to get geriatricians and wellness providers involved. And the good thing about this test is I could send you this test via a text message. You could download the app, take the test, and the report could be downloadable right to the doctor. And then that doctor can facilitate a telemedicine call, all without you having to even leave your house. That's the beauty of setting this up digitally. If we were to use something like the lab apparatus, we would have never been able to survive as a startup. You can't manufacture or afford to have large inventory and making apparatus that you're trying to send all over the world. Everybody has a phone, and if they don't have the phone themselves, the doctor has a phone, the staff has a phone, your neighbor, your grandkids, somebody has the phone where you could take this 10-minute test. Um, and so eventually, we're partnering with a few different people, but eventually would like to roll it out so that, hey, mom, I'm really worried about you. I bought you this test. Just take it, right? Like direct to consumer, you be able to test your parents and maybe have access to not really like the report that I showed you, which is really developed more for providers, but more maybe something that would be more developed for older adults to understand and comprehend themselves and be able to bring it to their doctor and say, this is what I found. What can we do? Because ultimately, those recommendations like physical therapy and some of the ones that require a prescription, you're going to need to have your doctor involved. So yeah, there's a lot of things, and what I wanted to mention was that falls are multifactorial. There are so many things that can happen to fall. I mean, anybody can go outside on a winter day and fall because of the ice, right? There are environmental things out there like bumps and curves and our vision like of depth perception not overstepping or understepping and leading to a sort of a stumble. But then there are other like medical conditions that lead to falls, like almost everybody has one of these, especially as we age. Vitamin D, osteoarthritis, osteoporosis. Have you had a fall in the past? Do you keep falling? Do you have orthostatic hypotension, diabetes? People with diabetes actually bomb this test as much as people with dementia. There's something going on with diabetes with the vascular system that is analogous to what's going on in Alzheimer's, and we're determined to figure out what that is because people with diabetes, especially those who have been on insulin for a very long time, for whatever reason, don't seem to integrate well. And we want to figure out why and what we can do about that. Other things like you mentioned, poor vision, difficulty walking, lack of muscle coordination, any sort of weakness and decreased cognition are all common risks or all common things that put people at risk for having a fall. So people, need to be aware of some of their weaknesses and be diligent in saying like, I have X, Y, and Z, and I'm worried. Like, I want to get tested because I want to know what is the treatment plan for me that will allow me to go out and, be free in the world that I live in. So we do have access on our website, catchu.net, to a blog where we sort of post information and, sort of tips about what you can do to avoid falls. I just put a couple of pictures up for you guys to see, but, there's access to stuff that is available throughout all different social media, websites and whatnot. But we also have some contributions from some scientists and researchers and practicing physicians from all around the world that sort of may or may not be obvious tips on how to avoid having a fall, balance and strength training. Dr. Verghese, and some of these are old because it still says Montefiore, but talks about your ability of walking and talking, and that could lead to how, if you can't do that, like walking and chewing gum, if you have a problem doing that, that could lead to a fall. Proper footwear. Walking around in high heels in your house isn't a good idea, nor is slippery slippers or something that doesn't have those grips because that could lead to a fall. We also have uh, the need to involve yourself in greater physical and cognitive activities, playing games and socializing with other adults. All of these things sort of keep your brain sharp and can reduce your risk of having a fall. A couple of published papers we have on CatchU that are out there, just sort of showing you that, this is a real thing and we're bringing it out and we're really hoping to really make a difference and, provide finally a quantitative test that, nurses and physicians and people have been yearning for so that we can avoid having so many people have a fall. And that's all I have for slides. So special thanks to Sandra for inviting me. Thanks to Montefiore and all of my team members, the studies of participants, and our funders. And we can open it up to a discussion.
Oh, this is really wonderful. Thank you so much. It's amazing. I just the fact that you thought of this. Wow,
Thank
it's
you.
it's really great. And well, I think you definitely had a very good inspiration and an angel watching over you, your grandma. So thank you for sharing that with us. I know. Um, my question is, obviously, this app is more for medical use. Do you think at some point later on, you can create an app that everybody can download and then say, look, doctor, I got this. I need you to look further into this and get me something. I feel that a lot of the medical care right now, it's in the patient's hands, and the more technology advances, the more we are empowered to bring issues to our doctors that sometimes will just, not be there somehow because time restrictions, because other things take over and all of that. So I was thinking, maybe if there, and as a matter of fact, as you were talking and describing how the app works, I remembered that there was this little game that my daughter used to play when she was little. It was like a piano, and then all of a sudden, like a key will sound and a color, and if it said red, I had to press the red, and if it said green, then I had to press the green. Oh my God, and it got faster and faster, and I was so
Yeah.
bad at it. It reminded me of that because that's kind of what it is, right? It's like they are stimulating you and you're pressing. So I was thinking maybe something like that we could say, oh my God, I'm so bad at this game. Like, I need to tell my doctor.
Right, right. That's exactly right. And I know the exact game you're talking about. The something to do with music, and I think it had a guitar,
Yes.
right? And probably was on like
I
PlayStation.
think there was a guitar and
Yeah,
another
yeah,
one, a piano.
yeah.
It was like, and again, it was the music. I mean, it was the tone and the color and the pressing.
And the speed and all of those things. And so what's like that's really interesting because that requires so much more cognition than what I'm doing, right? Everything I'm
Yeah,
doing is intentionally simple. Don't have to think about it. Just respond because we can catch it the best, but before having it clouded by cognition. We know that's something that is just so simple that it's you could just respond as soon as possible without thinking. Allows us to look at the like purest sort of events. If we start messing with colors and speed and manipulations of different stimuli, we'll probably see the same phenomenon, but it'll be clouded by other aspects of cognition and dexterity and all different things. So we're trying to keep it as simple as possible. And to your point about bringing it to the customer, I did have it up there, right? Direct to consumer. It is a wish list item of mine because, there are people who are worried well, and there are people who are advocating for themselves or their family members advocating for them. So I do eventually want to get this in the people's hands. However, I want to do it after we know some of the exact regions of the brain that, what we're studying now, and some of the best interventions that could be helpful so that we don't just leave you with, yeah, you're not a good integrator. You're not an integrator. CDC says this. We've found that in the lab, X, Y, and Z is the best thing you should do, and not have it be something medical, right? You can say like, it'd be good if you exercise. Everybody knows that exercise and eating well will probably be helpful, but do we actually do it? This might be, a sort of a wake-up call if you get this report and you think you're fine, and all of a sudden this little simple brain test is saying you're not. It might be the thing that pushes you over the edge to go about, making a change for the better sake of your life.
Yeah. And sometimes, for example, I have an aunt that is falling all the time. And we tell her, like, go to the doctor, find out maybe something's wrong. And then they say, no, everything's fine. But she keeps falling. Like she falls at least once a month.
No, she should definitely get
Yeah,
checked.
exactly. So
Something to
having
be
something like this that corroborates that observation, will be so helpful for patients, I think.
100%.
Yeah. Well, I don't see any more questions, maybe any comments from our attendees. And again, I think you're doing terrific work. I mean, you look so young too, and I feel like to get to the point where you are, you should be like 150. Because
Thank you so much. I do not feel young.
yes, no, definitely. And I appreciate that you have shared all this information with us. And people are saying thank you, very interesting. So yes, and I have no words. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys. Thank you so much. And thank you for listening. And definitely feel free to reach out and, you know, keep your eyes open. I hope that, over the next several months or years or however long it takes, that we'll be able to make a big enough splash in this world to help a lot of
Yeah.
people.
And it's up to us too, right? We can tell our doctors, that something like this exists, that we want it. So why not? We
Yes.
can be part of that change.
Let's
Oh,
do
nice.
it.
Yes. Yes, why not? We can help a little.
Absolutely. Well,
Okay,
thank you
well,
so very much for having me. I really appreciate it. This was fun, and I hope that you all have a great day. It's beautiful out.
it's beautiful. And then for those of you who are attending next week, we are going to be talking about You're Not Alone, support and resources for people with disabilities. So we're going to be talking about some resources that we have here in NIA for everyone with any type of disability. So talking about falls and disabilities, now we're going to head right into disabilities as well. Thank you so much, Dr. Mahoney. Thank you to all of our attendees, and I will see you next week. Thank you.
Thank you so much.